Bangkok Ghost Walk, Episode 4, The Trees That Watch. Nang Tani and the Spirits of Bangkok's Green Spaces. The digital entities I warned you about in my last transmission, they're not the only things that fill the void left by the V-pop network. Something much older, much more patient, has been watching from the shadows of Bangkok's green spaces. Something that's been here long before the city grew around it. As I walked through Lumpini Park this morning, past joggers and Tai Chi practitioners, past vendors setting up their morning stalls, I can feel them watching. The trees, not all of them, just the old ones. The ones that remember when this was all forest and swampland, before the concrete and steel transformed Thailand's landscape forever. My name, well, that still doesn't matter. What matters is that I've discovered something that makes the V-pop network look like child's play. While those cannibalistic spirits fed on human flesh and fear, what I'm about to tell you about feeds on something far more fundamental. The life force of the city itself. Bangkok isn't just a concrete jungle. It's a literal jungle that's been paved over, built upon, and forgotten. But the spirits that lived in those ancient trees didn't disappear when the forests were cleared. They adapted. They learned to inhabit the ornamental trees, the park greenery, the potted plants on every balcony and rooftop garden. They're called Nang Tani, tree spirits that appear as beautiful women to lure victims to their death. But the Bangkok Nang Tani are different from their rural cousins. They've evolved for urban hunting, learned to use the city's green infrastructure as a vast network of supernatural surveillance and predation. Every tree you pass, every park you walk through, every garden you admire, they're all potentially inhabited by entities that see humans not as fellow beings, but as mobile sources of life energy to be harvested at will. Let me start with what most people know about Nang Tani. Before I explain how they've adapted to city life, in traditional Thai folklore, Nang Tani are the spirits of women who died violent deaths and became bound to specific trees, usually banana trees in rural areas. They appear as stunningly beautiful women, often wearing traditional Thai clothing, with long black hair and pale, luminous skin. They use their beauty to seduce men, luring them away from safety before revealing their true nature. Vengeful spirits driven by an insatiable need for revenge against the living. But here's what the folklore doesn't tell you. Nang Tani aren't just random vengeful ghosts. They're part of a complex ecosystem of tree spirits that includes dozens of different entities, each with their own hunting methods, territorial boundaries, and feeding requirements. The banana tree spirits are just the most visible, the most aggressive. But every type of tree can potentially house a spirit. And in a city like Bangkok, with its millions of trees and countless green spaces, that creates an invisible supernatural infrastructure that most people never even suspect exists. As Bangkok grew from a small trading post to a megacity of over 10 million people, the Nang Tani had to adapt or die. The rural hunting grounds were disappearing, replaced by concrete and asphalt. Traditional banana trees were being replaced by ornamental species chosen for their aesthetic appeal rather than their spiritual significance. But evolution is a powerful force, and supernatural entities are no exception to its rules. The first documented case of urban Nang Tani adaptation occurred in 1987. The same year, Dr. Siriwan was researching VPOP clusters. A series of unexplained deaths in Chatuchak Park led investigators to discover that the park's ornamental trees had become inhabited by entities that retained all the hunting instincts of traditional Nang Tani, but had developed new abilities specifically suited to urban environments. These new urban spirits could communicate with each other across vast distances through root networks and underground fungal connections. They could influence electronic devices, causing phones to malfunction, cameras to produce distorted images, and GPS systems to lead people astray. Most disturbing of all, they could manipulate the city's green infrastructure to create hunting corridors that funneled victims towards predetermined kill zones. What makes Bangkok's Nang Tani so dangerous isn't their individual power, it's their collective intelligence. Over the past 3 decades, they've created what researchers call the Green Network, a city-wide communication system that uses every tree, every planted area, every rooftop garden as a node in a vast supernatural internet. Through this network, they can track individual humans across the entire city. Your morning jog through the park, your lunch break in a tree-lined plaza, your evening walk past the potted plants outside your apartment building. It's all being monitored, cataloged, and analyzed by entities that are building detailed profiles of every person in Bangkok. They know your routines, your vulnerabilities, your fears. They know when you're alone, when you're distracted, when you're most susceptible to their influence. And they're patient, incredibly patient. They'll watch you for months, even years, before making their move. I first became aware of the Green Network 3 months ago, while researching the aftermath of the VPOP ritual. I was walking through Lumpini Park, documenting the changes in supernatural activity since the cascade failure, when I noticed something odd about the trees. They were too perfectly arranged, not in the obvious sense. The park's landscaping had always been carefully planned, but there was a mathematical precision to their placement that suggested something beyond human design. The spacing between trees, the angles of their branches, the way shadows fell at different times of day, it all formed patterns that were too complex to be coincidental. I started mapping these patterns, using GPS coordinates and photogrammetry software to create detailed models of the park's layout. What I discovered was a geometric network that resembled nothing as much as a massive circuit board, with each tree serving as a component in some vast organic computer. But it wasn't until I tried to leave the park that I realized I was already trapped in the web. Every exit I tried led me back to the center of the park. Every path I took, no matter how carefully I navigated, somehow curved back on itself. The GPS on my phone showed me moving in straight lines, but my actual position kept returning to the same cluster of ornamental trees near the artificial lake. That's when I saw her. The first Bangkok Nang Tani I'd ever encountered directly. She was sitting on a bench about 50 meters away, reading a book. Beautiful in the way that makes you stop and stare. Long black hair that caught the light like silk. Pale skin that seemed to glow with its own inner radiance. Wearing a simple white dress that looked both modern and timeless. But there were details that marked her as something other than human. Her feet didn't quite touch the ground, hovering just a centimeter above the concrete. The book in her hand had no text. The pages were blank, but she turned them with the careful attention of someone reading an engrossing story. And most disturbingly of all, the tree behind her bench was moving its branches in perfect synchronization with her breathing, as if they were connected by invisible threads. She looked up from her book and smiled at me. Not the predatory grin of a P-pop entity, but something warm and inviting, and absolutely terrifying in its perfection. "You're the one who's been mapping our network," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the distance, despite speaking barely above a whisper. "We've been watching you, waiting for you to understand what you're really looking at." I tried to run. Of course I tried to run, but the paths had changed while we were talking. Where there had been open walkways, there were now dense thickets of bamboo. Where there had been clear sightlines to the park exits, there were now walls of flowering vines that seemed to have grown to full maturity in a matter of minutes. "Don't be afraid," she said. And suddenly she was standing right beside me, though I hadn't seen her move. "We're not like the others. We don't consume flesh or feast on terror. We're gardeners." "Gardeners?" "The city is sick," she explained, gesturing at the skyline visible beyond the park's boundaries. "Concrete and steel and plastic, choking out the natural world. Millions of people living in artificial environments, disconnected from the earth that sustains them. We're here to restore the balance." That's when I understood. The Green Network wasn't just a communication system. It was a terraforming project. The Nang Tani weren't just hunting individual victims. They were slowly, systematically converting Bangkok into the forest it had been before human civilization arrived. She showed me the true scope of their operation, not through words, but through direct connection to the Green Network itself. For a few terrifying minutes, I experienced Bangkok through the collective consciousness of every tree spirit in the city. I could feel the root system spreading beneath the concrete, slowly undermining foundations and cracking pavements. I could sense the chemical signals being released by ornamental plants, subtly influencing human behavior and making people more susceptible to suggestion. I could perceive the slow but inexorable expansion of green spaces as the spirits manipulated city planning decisions and real estate development. They weren't just adapting to urban life, they were actively reshaping it. Every new park, every rooftop garden, every tree-lined street was part of a master plan to gradually reclaim the city for the natural world. "How long?" I asked. "We've been working for 30 years, she replied. "We estimate another 50 years before the transformation is complete. By then, Bangkok will be indistinguishable from the forest that existed here centuries ago. The concrete will be overgrown. The buildings will be hollow shells filled with vines and moss. And the people, well, the people will have learned to live in harmony with nature again, one way or another." The "one way or another" part was what made my blood run cold. I pressed her for details, and what she revealed was a systematic program of human modification that made the P-pop possessions process look merciful by comparison. The Nang Tani weren't killing people outright. Instead, they were slowly converting them into hybrid beings, part human, part plant. The process took years, beginning with subtle changes in behavior and diet, progressing through physical modifications, and ending with complete integration into the green network. We call them our gardeners, she explained with obvious pride. They retain their human intelligence and memories, but their priorities shift. They become caretakers of the growing forest, helping us expand our territory and recruit new converts. She showed me examples, people I recognized from the neighborhood. The old man who spent hours every day tending the plants outside his apartment building. The young woman who'd started a community garden in an empty lot. The businessman who'd recently quit his job to become an urban farming consultant. All of them showed the telltale signs of conversion. Skin that had a faint green tinge in a certain light. Hair that grew in patterns resembling leaf structures. Eyes that reflected light like nocturnal animals. And most disturbing of all, a complete lack of interest in anything that didn't relate to plants, gardening, or environmental restoration. Once you know what you look for, the signs of Nang Tani influence are everywhere in Bangkok. The way certain streets have become inexplicably greener over the past few years, the sudden popularity of rooftop gardens and vertical farming, the increasing number of people who've developed plant obsessions and spend all their free time gardening. Even the city government has been influenced. Environmental initiatives that seem progressive and forward-thinking now reveal themselves as part of the spirit's long-term strategy. The push for more green spaces, the requirements for building to include plant life, the incentives for urban farming, it's all being subtly guided by entities that see human civilization as a temporary inconvenience to be gradually eliminated. But the most insidious aspect of their influence is how they've made their agenda seem beneficial. Who could argue against more trees, cleaner air, and sustainable living? The Nang Tani have positioned themselves as environmental saviors, making it almost impossible to oppose them without seeming to oppose environmental protection itself. Remember those digital entities I warned you about in the last episode? The ones that feed on attention and engagement? The Nang Tani have formed an alliance with them, a symbiotic relationship that's more terrifying than either threat alone. The digital parasites drive people to spend more time online, creating a need for digital detox and reconnection with nature. The Nang Tani provide that reconnection, offering peaceful green spaces and gardening activities that seem like healthy alternatives to screen time. But every moment spent in their influence spaces is an opportunity for conversion. Every Instagram post about urban gardening, every TikTok video about plant care, every YouTube channel dedicated to sustainable living, they're all potential recruitment tools for the green network. The algorithm doesn't just show you content you're likely to engage with. It shows you content that makes you more susceptible to plant spirit influence. The more time you spend consuming green content online, the more likely you are to seek out real plants in the physical world. And once you start spending significant time around plants in Bangkok, you're entering Nang Tani territory. I've been tracking the conversion process for months now, documenting the stages that humans go through as they're gradually transformed into gardeners. It's a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, so subtle that most victims never realize what's happening to them. Stage 1. Attraction. The subject develops an unusual interest in plants and gardening. This might manifest as buying household plants, visiting botanical gardens, or following plant-related social media accounts. The interest seems natural and healthy. Who doesn't want to be more connected to nature? Stage 2. Obsession. The plant interest becomes consuming. The subject spends increasing amount of time and money on plants, often to the detriment of other relationships and activities. They begin to anthropomorphize their plants, talking to them, and believing they can sense the plants' needs and emotions. Stage 3. Integration. The subject begins to show physical changes. Their skin develops a slight green tinge, most noticeable in natural sunlight. Their hair becomes thicker and more lustrous, with growth patterns that resemble leaf venation. They develop an aversion to processed foods, preferring raw fruits and vegetables and eventually subsisting almost entirely on plant matter. Stage 4. Networking. The subject becomes able to communicate directly with plants through touch. They can sense the health and needs of any plant they encounter, and the plants respond to their presence by growing more vigorously. At this stage, they become nodes in the green network, able to receive and transmit information through the plant communication system. Stage 5. Transcendence. The final stage involves complete integration with the green network. The subject's human consciousness merges with the collective plant intelligence, retaining their memories and personality, but gaining access to the vast knowledge and sensory capabilities of the entire network. They become gardeners, caretakers of the growing urban forest, and recruiters for new converts. Let me tell you about Siriripon, a 28-year-old marketing executive who became one of Bangkok's most popular plant influencers before disappearing entirely from social media 6 months ago. Siripon's transformation began 2 years ago when she bought her first houseplant, a simple pothos from a street vendor near her office. Within weeks, she'd filled her apartment with dozens of plants, documenting their growth on Instagram with the hashtag #BangkokPlantMom. Her followers loved her content. She had a natural talent for plant care, and her apartment became a lush green oasis that provided a stark contrast to Bangkok's concrete landscape. Brands started reaching out for partnerships, and within a year, she'd quit her marketing job to become a full-time plant influencer. But her followers started noticing changes. Her skin looked different in photos, healthier, but with an unusual luminosity that didn't seem entirely natural. Her hair grew at an impossible rate, requiring weekly trims to maintain her signature style. Most disturbing of all, her plants seemed to respond to her presence in ways that defied botanical science. In her final video, posted 6 months ago, Siriporn announced that she was taking a break from social media to focus on a special project. The video was filmed in what appeared to be a greenhouse, though she'd never mentioned having access to such a facility. Behind her, dozens of exotic plants swayed gently despite the absence of any visible breeze. "I've learned so much about the plant kingdom," she said, her voice carrying an odd hypnotic quality. "About how plants communicate, how they think, how they feel. I want to share this knowledge with the world, but not through screens and cameras, through direct experience." The video ended with her reaching out to touch a large flowering vine. The moment her fingers made contact with the plant, both she and the vine began to glow with a soft green light. The camera malfunctioned, filling with static, and the video cut off. Siriporn's apartment was found empty a week later, filled with plants but showing no signs of human habitation. Her landlord reported that the plants seemed to be thriving despite the absence of any caretaker, and that the apartment had developed an unusual microclimate, cooler and more humid than the surrounding units, with air that smelled perpetually of rain and growing things. City porn wasn't an isolated case. She was part of a systemic recruitment program that the Nang Tani had been running through social media for years. They identify individuals with large followings and strong interest in plants and environmental issues, then gradually guide them through the conversion process while using their platforms to influence their audiences. The plant influencer phenomenon isn't organic. It's being carefully cultivated by entities that understand the power of social media to shape human behavior. Every viral plant video, every trending gardening hashtag, every Instagram account dedicated to houseplant care is potentially part of the Green Network's recruitment strategy. They're particularly effective at targeting young urban professionals, people who feel disconnected from nature due to their city lifestyles, people who have disposable income to spend on plants, people who are active on social media and can influence others. The demographic that's mostly susceptible to plant spirit influence is exactly the demographic that drives social media trends. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Nang Tani operation is their focus on children. They've established educational gardens in schools throughout Bangkok, ostensibly to teach children about environmental responsibility and sustainable living. These gardens are staffed by gardeners, converted humans who retain enough of their original personalities to seem normal to casual observers, but who are actually agents of the Green Network. They use their positions to identify children who show particular sensitivity to plant communication, then begin the conversion process at an age when the subjects are most malleable. I've documented dozens of cases where children who participated in these gardens programs began showing signs of conversion within months. Parents initially celebrate their children's newfound interest in plants and environmental issues, not realizing that they're witnessing the early stages of a supernatural transformation. The converted children become recruitment agents themselves, influencing their classmates and family members to spend more time around plants. They organize school gardening clubs, lobby for more green spaces on campus, and gradually create environments where plant spirit influence can spread throughout the educational system. The most terrifying discovery I've made is the extent to which the Nang Tani have infiltrated Bangkok's government and urban planning departments. Key officials in environmental and city planning roles show clear signs of conversion, and their policy decisions consistently favor the expansion of green spaces and plant-friendly infrastructure. The city's ambitious environmental initiatives, the push for vertical gardens on buildings, the requirements for green roofs, the expansion of park systems, they're all being driven by converted officials who are unknowingly serving the Green Network's agenda. Building permits are increasingly difficult to obtain unless projects include significant plant life. Environmental impact assessments favor developments that incorporate extensive landscaping. Zoning laws are being quietly modified to require green spaces in residential and commercial areas. The Nang Tani have achieved something that no environmental movement has managed. They've made environmental protection a governmental priority by converting the people who make the decisions. But the diversions of environmental protections involves the gradual elimination of human civilization as we know it. Not everyone is susceptible to plant spirit influence. Some people have natural resistance, usually individuals with strong connections to technology, urban environments, or artificial systems. Ironically, the same digital addiction that makes people vulnerable to the attention-feeding entities provides some protection against plant spirit conversion. There's a small but growing resistance movement made of people who recognize the threat and are working to expose the Green Network's operations. They call themselves the Concrete Coalition, urban dwellers who embrace the artificial nature of city life and actively resist the push towards natural living. The coalition has developed techniques for identifying converted individuals and mapping the expansion of plant spirit influence. They've created apps that can detect the electromagnetic signatures of green network nodes, and they've established safe houses in areas with minimal plant life, usually high-rise buildings with sealed environments and artificial air filtration. But they're fighting an uphill battle. The Nang Tani have positioned themselves as environmental saviors, making it almost impossible to oppose them without seemingly to impose environmental protection itself. Anyone who speaks out against urban gardening or green space expansion is immediately labeled as an anti-environment and dismissed. The alliance between the Nang Tani and the digital entities has created a perfect trap for modern humans. If you spend too much time online, you become vulnerable to the attention parasites. If you try to disconnect and spend time in nature, you enter plant spirit territory. The only safe spaces are the liminal zones, urban areas with minimal plant life and limited digital connectivity. But these spaces are shrinking as the city becomes greener and more connected. Soon, there will be nowhere in Bangkok that isn't influenced by one supernatural network or another. The digital entities drive people towards digital detox experiences, while the plant spirits provide those experiences in the form of gardening and natural connection. It's a perfect recruitment pipeline that feeds both networks while giving humans the illusion of choice. As I finish this walk through Bangkok's green spaces, I want you to understand the scope of what we're facing. The feed-pop network fed on individual victims. The digital entities consume attention and engagement. But the Nang Tani are attempting something far more ambitious: the complete transformation of human civilization. They're not trying to destroy us, they're trying to convert us into something else entirely. Something that serves their vision of a world where nature has reclaimed dominance over technology, where human consciousness has been integrated into a vast plant intelligence network. And they're succeeding. Every day, more people fall under their influence. Every day, Bangkok becomes a little greener, a little more plant-friendly, a little less human. The question isn't whether you can avoid them. In a city like Bangkok, that's impossible. The question is whether you can recognize their influence when it begins, and whether you have the strength to resist the conversion process once it starts. So here's your choice. You can dismiss this as another ghost story, another piece of entertainment to consume and forget. You can continue living your life, buying house plants and visiting parks, following plant influencers on social media, never realizing that each of these activities is drawing you deeper into a supernatural network that sees your human consciousness as raw material for its grand design. Or you can start paying attention, start noticing the patterns, start questioning why you suddenly have the urge to buy that succulent, visit that new garden center, follow that plant care account. Because once you start looking, you'll see them everywhere. The gardeners walking among us, tending their urban forests, the converted officials making policy decisions that favor plant life over human needs, the influencers spreading the gospel of green living while slowly transforming into something that's no longer entirely human. The trees are watching. They've always been watching. The only question is whether you'll notice before it's too late to look away. This is where I leave you today. Walking the streets of Bangkok, surrounded by green spaces that are beautiful and peaceful, and absolutely terrifying once you understand what they really are. Remember, not all growth is good, not all green is natural, and not all environmental protection serves human interests. The next time you feel the urge to buy a plant, ask yourself, is this desire really your own, or is something else planting seeds in your mind? The trees are listening. They're always listening, and they're very, very patient.